Our squadron, VMFA 334, was one of the first aviation squadrons to be pulled out of theater in Vietnam. And we got pulled back as a squadron to Iwakuni, Japan. But then there was something different that happened in Iwakuni. Instead of us all coming back as a unit, they would let 10 go, 12 go, 3 go. And I came back home and I landed at El Toro, California on a Continental Golden Tail. And it felt like I was Ralph Ellison, who wrote The Invisible Man, because it was like they ushered us back into the country late at night. They just wanted you to come back and just don't make no noise. Don't rock the boat. But when we came back to Springfield, I got back to Springfield, and it was only my brother who picked me up at the airport. And similar to Gene, there was no fanfare. My brother picked me up at the airport, and he's smaller than me. I knew he couldn't pick that up, but he was there to pick me up. And I come back to Springfield, and I come back in '69. And you know the sad part, when I come back, they was having racial disturbance on the streets of Springfield. Absolutely. And I was confined to being in the house. Couldn't even go out in my own community because of disturbances in the street. The National Guards would march in the street. And the irony of that, before I went to Vietnam, when I was a kid, we had the problems in Court Square, where they beat my 2 sisters up in Court Square because they were protesting the conditions. And it was like, nothing has really changed.
One of the things that I think that helped us, I realized if we were going to get any help at all, we had to help ourselves. We had to step up to the plate and help ourselves. And once we can help ourselves, then we can help others. But we got to get ourselves together first. And I can remember when I was in one of the biggest battles in Vietnam, and where we lost 28 of my friends got killed one night, and 64 got wounded. Now, you know, as a rifle platoon commander, that knocks out the entire company out. And the next day, it was like 15 of us left alive. And we did a sweep of the area, and we swept up over 500 enemies that we had killed that night. And I looked around, and all my friends were gone. And I felt like my whole world had just fell off from underneath me. And I got on my knees, and I said, God, if you let me out of this place alive, let me finish my career, I promise you that I will work for the rest of my life for veterans and their families for free. And in 1993, I retired from the Army after 28 years. From that point till now, I've worked for veterans and their families for free. I've traveled the country. I've been in prisons looking for veterans, trying to help get their lives together, especially Vietnam veterans. We got Vietnam veterans who've been in prison since 1970. Just locked up and throwing the key away.
Well, that leads to the next question in terms of the what's your assessment of the type of services that through the VA or other agencies, federal agencies that you've received or that you've observed other veterans have received? How would you assess that process?
The VA has some good programs.
Same question for the other
two.
The
VA has some very, very good programs, if you know how to assess them.
Okay.
If you have no way of getting those services, they're nothing to you. But if you know how to get those services, they have a lot of good services. They have services that if a veteran can't get around in his home, they will come in with a grant and redo your whole home for you. If you can't drive your vehicle because of an illness or lower extremity problem, they'll buy you a vehicle and train you how to drive it. It's a very, very good, they're one of the best medical programs in the world, the VA has. They have good doctors. They have all that good stuff there. And if you don't know how to get into their programs, you don't get it. And now they've gone a little farther. They've put everything that they got on computer. So if you're not computer illiterate, you don't have a computer in your home, you're gonna miss even more. NAVES is an organization that was created in 1971 by some black officers who came back from the war and found themselves having a hard time getting services. And they said to themselves, if we're having all this hard time getting services as officers, as generals too, 2-star generals, 1-star generals, big time officers, and they couldn't get their cases heard. So they said, if we're having this kind of a problem, what kind of problem is the enlisted man going through? So they said, we need to put together an organization that would address those issues. And they called themselves the National Association of Black Veterans, who've been around since 1972. They have 52 chapters in the United States, to include Virgin Islands and Guam, the two territorial states. And we have one in Springfield here, 0012, which is our chapter. And we're continuing on that history of helping veterans help themselves.
I'm going to put something on. I think it has a lot to do with how veterans access services. McNamara put together a program called Project 100,000. They took poorly educated individuals and individuals that were not physically fit for military duty, especially people of color, and McNamara called himself providing them opportunities in the military.
People who normally wouldn't be able to
they wouldn't have passed muster.
The
but they got into the military, and they primarily went into combat units. And nowadays, I run into a lot of individuals who are not able to access VA services. And you talk to them, and you get the sense that they're not comfortable with a pen and pencil. But when you peel the onion back, some of these folks were folks that wouldn't have been in the military to begin with. So if you didn't get it then, if you didn't have the education back then, and you didn't pick up the education through the years, now you're 68, 69 years old. People are trying to tell you to pick up a computer, become computer literate. Some of those folks were struggling with the ABCs of things, basic mathematics. And as such, they were not able to take advantage of the services to the VA head, because some people don't want people to know that they may not know how to read or write. And being in the Winchester Square Vietnam era veterans and working with veterans for years, found that there's a lot of veterans that are not proficient with a pen and pencil. And as such, they're not always able to get access to the same services. So this thing about literacy and access run hand in hand. And that Project 100,000 affected a lot of veterans, and it's still affecting those folks today.
And we can see it every day.
I think a total of about 350,000 or almost 400,000 people came through that program.
Yes,
and
yes.
And they had very high attrition rates.
Yes.
In the military, and that data has been borne out as well.
Right.
Milton, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's really understanding that the VA is an extension of the government bureaucracy. And the government bureaucracies always have barriers. Their goal seems to be the avoidance of providing services rather than seeking people out who need those services. And as Gene alluded to, one of the things that the National Association for Black Veterans Springfield chapter is trying to do is to break through that barrier of the technology issue. And we plan to set up a Veterans Outreach Center that has a computer lab as a strong part of its services, which would allow veterans to come in, those that are computer savvy, to file their claims online, which would break through the issue of privacy and also would allow us to be able to assist them in learning the skills of accessing services via the computer. The one thing we know is that you can access, if you can break that nut, you can access services faster via the computer and get your claims filed in a much more efficient way.
And I'm a living experience of that. I'm one of the few veterans who was able to get the grant of $68,000 to get your home redone. I'm also one of the few veterans who was able to deal with the paperwork and get a vehicle and go and be retrained because I couldn't drive because I have no use of my lower limbs. So both my feet are dead with four knee replacements. So I was sitting home in a bedroom looking out the window.
You know, this is a perfect segue into the final segment that we want to talk about, and the sort of support that's available to veterans, advice, and what you see in the future. And so, you know, give your thoughts on that. We'll hit each one of you, and kind of roll up into that what we can do for our young people to help them serve and to turn their lives around. Does that question resonate with each of you? So go ahead and continue, James.
Like I said, I was the only reason that I could do that because I had learned the system. I had worked with Mr. Belton and Milton, and we had learned we had taught each other how to get services. Yeah. And then whenever I had a big problem, I would get on the phone and call Tom and say, Tom, I got a problem. I've gone this far. Can you get me the rest of the way? Yeah. And he would say yes. If he couldn't, he would put me in touch with someone who could get me the rest of the way. And that's how I've been able to make it.
I see.
Without the support of the rest of the guys here, I'd be in my bedroom looking out the window again. Because I did that for years. And when I got the knowledge of how to really help myself, my life began to change.
Okay.
My life began to change. I mean, after 28 years in the military, you feel, well, he's got it made. Well, the money was coming in, that was good, but my mind was screwed up. I mean, I had never dealt with PTSD before. I didn't know I had PTSD. Until when my mom passed away in 1988, that's when I realized I had PTSD. Because I came home from Germany and went to her funeral. And I broke down, I completely lost it. But my mind went back to my war days in Vietnam. And I thought of all the people who had died that I was with. And now my mom died. And all that brought PTSD out of me. So that's when I realized that, hey, I got to get some help here. I'm getting out of this army in 4 or 5 years. I got to get some help here. And that's when once again, I called Belton because we have always been friends. I said, Tom, I need some help. I really need some help. And him and the group, Winchester Square Vietnam era veterans, they pulled me through. And I'm very grateful for that.
Okay. Thomas?
It's hard because you don't know what you don't know. When I came back, my coping mechanism for all my issues was that I either became a workaholic or I spent all my time in school. But I got married, experienced some problems, and I can distinctly remember 1993, I had a meltdown. Digital had closed in Springfield. I lost my job on March 26, 1993. I had some difficulties at home that weekend with my wife. My wife left, took the 2 children with me on a Sunday. On a Monday, I almost ate a bullet. And the only reason that I didn't eat that bullet from a 92 Beretta, a 92F Beretta, is I heard my son's footsteps. He was about 4 or 5 years old, coming up the steps. And I said, what would I have done to my son? Help from the VA. And I went down to the vet center where all my buddies used to hang at. And I got in there and I started getting some services. But I had to come on out of there because I got tired of talking about the war. I didn't want to rehash the war every time I went there. And I went for individual therapy. And there was a man that I owe my life to today. And I hope he sees the program. And he helped a lot of brothers that came through his door. His name was Kenneth Lenchek. And he taught me how to hug another male. Because for me, hugging another male was just, you don't do that. And I learned through going through therapy, he helped me get through some very difficult times in my life. He helped me get myself together. And he also helped me with the fact that you got to have a purpose in life. And my purpose has always been, I want to make people's lives better that are veterans. The same mission that the Winchester Square Vietnam era veterans said in '78, we want to improve the quality of life for veterans. And that purpose has what's kept me going, because a year ago, I had brain cancer surgery. I had a tumor removed from my brain. And my doctor told me, she said, I can't believe how incredibly well you're doing. Because she said most people couldn't do what you do. But the purpose of having something to do in your life, that is so important to keep you focused. And a lot of veterans lose their focus because they lose a sense of purpose. But a sense of purpose is what's so important. And I say that because the community needs to understand that veterans have a lot to contribute.
The one thing that stands out for me, though, that I think I would mention is one of my very, very good friends from high school died in Vietnam, and that was Ronnie Hurst. We were a couple of years apart. We were like an odd couple. He was a freshman, I was a senior. But I don't think people understood how mature Ronnie was at his young age and made the decision to go to Vietnam. That always stood out for me because I thought that was one of my ultimate examples of bravery.
I'm going to put in a plug for the Winchester Square Vietnam era veterans.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We got together in 1976 and started talking. We got our charter in 1978. But something that's very important, and I don't want to leave here without putting it in, is when we left to go to Vietnam, we left from Winchester Square. And as such, when we came back, there was a monument up in Winchester Square. And Milton, as you alluded to, you knew Ronnie. Yeah. Ronnie and I went to elementary school at Acushnet Avenue. Gus Stovall is my cousin. And I was in the company of the Secretary of Veterans Services, Juan Hurena, and he was sharing with me how Boston had the oldest veterans monument. They were a legend. They had the oldest veterans monument in the country and in the state. And he told me that Boston went up in 1980. And I told him, I said, well, sir, you're going to have to come back here one day, and I'll have to show you what is potentially the oldest in the country. But because he's a very busy man, I put together a package and sent to him with all the documentation from Mayor Friedman when he dedicated it, November the 11th, 1967. Veterans. And I put that in there, and I sent it to the secretary. And the secretary Last time I saw him, he told me, Tom, you need to get in touch with the person who wrote that article for the Boston Globe and claimed that they had the oldest one. And I sent him an email with the same package that I sent to the secretary, the whole 9 yards. I sent it to him, no response. I sent him a second one, a reminder saying, I haven't heard from you. I'd like to see if you could get back to me. No answer. So Marines don't like to take it that way. So today I happened to be walking down the street and I ran into some folks that work for the Republican that have done stories on Winchester Square Vietnam era veterans. And I shared it with one of the reporters at the Republican. And I also shared it with one of the producers down here, a fellow by the name of Tony Bass. But I gave them the information because we don't want to be slighted. We don't want to be slighted. That monument was dedicated to Negro veterans, November the 11th, 1967. And I want us to be recognized. I've met with Congressman Neal along with Gene Bryce several years ago about trying to get it to be a national historical landmark. And he shared with us at that time it had to be 50 years old. We're approaching that 50-year mark. And Skippy Williams was very instrumental in raising the funds to get that monument put up there. But through the years, the Winchester Square Vietnam era veterans have made sure that nothing has happened to that plot of land and that people will remember those folks who are on that monument. And that's part of the legacy that veterans in this community have to offer if we're given a chance to participate.
One of the things that was clearly obvious to me when I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, and I fortunate to achieve the rank of lieutenant colonel, and was that the Marine Corps is the officer corps, the percentage of black officers in the Marine Corps when I was on active duty was in the neighborhood of 3, maybe 3.5%. And in the infantry, or the combat arms, infantry and artillery, and tanks, it was far less than that. While the percentage of, like in the first platoon that I took over, was about 40% black on the enlisted force. But I was the only black officer in the company out of all the lieutenants and the captain and so forth. And even when I was a company commander, that held firm. So I had two of my uncles who went to Montford Point and served in the Marine Corps in World War II. And interestingly, and another uncle who was in the Army during the Korean War served in combat. And interestingly, when they all returned from war in the South, none of them could vote.
Isn't that something?
None of them could vote.
Something?
You know,
You can go fight, but you can't vote.
they can't vote. See.
And Jim Crow law.
But and that wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't that long ago at all.
You know, that when the first platoon I took over in Okinawa, they had a riot before I got there where a lot of the black Marines had refused to fall out for formation. And then when I took the platoon over as time went on, instead of black Marines and white Marines, they would refer to themselves as dark green and light green. And so I had
We found a way. We found a way to make a joke out of it. We will. You know, one thing I learned by being in the military, no matter what color you are,
right.
when the rubber hits the road, all of the blood is red.
That's right. That's
The
right.
blood is red, and I'll go down as hard for my white brother as I would for one of my black brothers. I mean, it's just the way we are as soldiers.
You know, and that's interesting because you all earlier in the earlier conversation kind of drew the distinction between individual deployments and unit deployments.
Right.
And I don't think there's any question that when you're talking about unit deployments, it's a far more
Right.
cohesive
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely.
And when you're coming back as a unit, you've got all the, the bands are
Supporting
there, and the
cast, supporting
families
cast,
are there, and so forth,
yeah.
instead of coming back individually in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
You know?
But I'd like to just dovetail off of something that you said about your cousins and uncles down south. I have a cousin. His name is Harold Phillips. He hails out of Morristown, New Jersey. He was one of the first black Marines to go through Montford Point after Eleanor Roosevelt convinced her husband to desegregate the military. And 2 years ago, he received the Congressional Gold Medal from President Obama because there's not that many Montford Point Marines left around.
No, no.
And I only bring it up because Harold influenced my brother. My brother influenced me. And I hope I've had a chance to influence other individuals. I'm not telling everybody to go in the military, but the military has played a major role in shaping America and dealing with race relationships, and I think they will continue to do that.
I'll tell a little bit about myself now. I'm like Milton, I never served in country. During the Vietnam War from 68 to 72, I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy in Annapolis and was commissioned in the Marine Corps in June of 72 and went to Okinawa. In early, I think 1983, on the part of 22 Mao, Marine Amphibious Unit, I was the XO of the MSSG. And we left Morehead City in North Carolina the middle of October on our way to Beirut to relieve the unit over there on a 6-month rotation. One day we got up and the sun was in the wrong direction. In other words, the sun was on the port side of the ship, so we were no longer heading into the sun in the early morning. And the word came, had a commander's meeting, and we were told we were going to rescue some medical students at some place called Grenada. So we were headed down there, and on a Sunday morning, the 23rd of October, one of my staff sergeants was walking across the mess deck, and he was wiping his eyes. He had been crying. And I said, Staff Sergeant Mumford, I said, what's the problem? He said, sir, we had just got it on the radio that 24 Mao, our sister outfit that we were going to relieve in Beirut, had been bombed. And the death toll kept going up, and finally it stopped at 251 Marines and sailors on that day. We hit the beach at Grenada 2 days later on the 25th. 5-day operation, and got back, hit Beirut the middle of November. So now the situation had changed from an administrative situation to we want to fortified, we were going to build bunkers and so forth. And since I was infantry, they tasked and put me in charge of the security of the vital area where that truck had come through. And we had MPs on the gate that had things to, bomb detectors, and had back about 50 yards from them, we had 2 Marines. One had a Law Light anti-tank weapon, the other had an 50 caliber machine gun. And so those Marines on the gate, the MPs had orders that if a truck tried to come through there, you don't try to stop it, you hit the deck, because that 50 cal was going to be opening up. And I checked posts, and the comm chief would wake me up every morning around 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had to walk across this open field to get to those last 2 posts and heading towards the airport tower, which was across the street where snipers had been. And my prayer every day was the same. I said, Master, I said, if you take me, let my wife and baby know how much they mean to me. Every day, same prayer. So, we're all privileged to have served, had the opportunity to serve our country. And I can say to my child, I did my part.
That's right.
I did my part.
So happy Veterans Day to all of you.
Right on.
And welcome
Same
home.
to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Well, my brother.
Right on.